Ladies and gentlemen, please be all welcome to panel 4, Shaping the Battlefield, Adaptation of Operations and Tools of War. In this session, we will dive deep into modern warfare and strategic adaptation necessary for NATO and its member states in light of recent conflicts. Historically, Western armies has enjoyed technological edge, mostly in low-intensity conflicts against many adversaries, which allowed us to keep a dominance in the battlefield. However, the landscape of the battlefield is shifting, galvanized by emerging regional and global powers. The ongoing war in Ukraine has highlighted the critical importance of sheer quantity of relatively cheap and simple arms, munition, and equipment. The ability rapidly to mobilize and sustain large forces in operation areas has proven to be a critical factor. It seems that accepting heavy losses also plays a vital role in determining who will prevail at the end of the armed conflict. So, our Western societies ready for a possible high-intensity, large-scale war? What are the lessons identified in adapting war tools for future operations? What improvements should make NATO and its member states to address these security challenges? For this task, our distinguished panelists will explore the lessons NATO, Europe, and especially Baltic nations can draw from these developments. We will start the discussion with a short brief about what has changed on the battlefield globally, regionally, and locally. The discussion will focus on adapting armies for a major conventional war needs. As a result, speakers will unravel the adaptation needs of building military forces. Finally, the adaptation of operations going from strategic to tactical level will close the panel. At the end of the session, the audience is asked to give questions which will be addressed. The listeners of the panel are invited to place questions of their choice using the Slido app. So please put hot welcome to our distinguished panelists. Please, sir. Yes, sir. So, gentlemen, we are glad you are having here. So let's introduce our speakers. So Mr. Neeme is a distinguished military leader, a former chief of general staff of Estonian Defense Forces, bringing extensive experience and expertise to our discussion, with a remarkable career with the Estonian Defense Forces, including appointment as the Estonian military representative to NATO and EU. Now, our retired Major General Väli has made a significant contribution to security and defense establishments. We are honored to have you, sir, here to share your perspectives with us today. Your strategic insights will be invaluable for our panel. Another speaker is the Major General Matthew J. Wagenen, is a distinguished military leader with a wealth of experience in military operations. Currently, he is serving as SHAPE Deputy Chief of Staff Operations. The general plays a pivotal role in monitoring the strategic environment and overseeing the current operations for the SHAPE, with an extensive background commanding diverse military units and serving in key operational and leadership positions. Major General Wagenen brings a deep understanding of military strategy and operations to our discussion panel. We are delighted to have you on the panel, sir, to bring your insight with us today. Your perspectives on NATO strategic adjustments in response to current global threats will be crucial to our panel. So the last one, but not the least one, Dr. Patrick Burry, our esteemed panelist is a reader, senior associate professor in security at the Politics, Language, International Studies Department from the University of the Bath. With over 20 years of experience in the security sector, including military service as British Army captain and NATO analyst, Dr. Burry has made a significant contribution to scholarly publications and global media outlets. His exceptional expertise in international security, warfare, counter-terrorism, conscription, and reserve forces makes him available to our discussion. We are happy having you, Dr. Burry, here, and we will expecting that you will allow us to bridge the gap between theoretical frameworks and practical application in military operations. Gentlemen, again, thank you again for being here and for being willing to share ideas with us despite your time-demanding duties. I know, sir, that you only yesterday night landed here in Vilnius and you are departing here today. So it's nice to have you here. And I am Gintautas Razma from Defense Staff Guide, and we will try to keep us on track. So let's start our discussion from a brief overview. So in the first part of our discussion, we will explore changes in the battlefield. So I put a bold question: what has changed, or something has changed at all? Dr. Burry, are we witnessing a clash of civilizations as Huntington envisioned in Ukraine, in Middle East, probably Taiwan? Yeah? Is the era of war and terrorism is obsolete? Has the era of large-scale conventional wars opened again in Ukraine? And what kind of adaptation do the global security shifts call for Western defense strategies? Can you give us a brief overview of changes in the global security realm? The floor is yours, Doctor.
I can try. It's a bit difficult to say anything new on the second day of such a good conference, but what I thought I'd do, and thank you, Gintautas, and for the Locked and Loaded team for hosting such a good event, and delighted to be here. I thought what I would maybe add some value, as it were, is talk about some recent publications which the organisers can then provide later on, which may or may not just help shape your thinking. So I thought I'd pick up on the first question, or one of the middle ones actually, is the era of the global war on terrorism over? And yes and no is the short answer. Obviously, this has been heavily focused, this conference, on the threat to the Baltics, etc., not so much on terrorism, and I'll come back to a little bit of overlap there. But what you find is, in terms of, I think one of the biggest lessons, and it's actually why we're all here today, when I served last time I was in Vilnius, actually 16 years ago, was rather poignant, because I was a captain in the army, and we were burying one of our soldiers in the cemetery in Rakatunas. He'd been killed, Justin Couples had been killed in Afghanistan. He was Irish American. He'd served in the US Navy. And he was married to a Lithuanian, hence why he was buried here. And so you ended up with this team of a Lithuanian honor guard, a US Marine Corps honor guard, and then the burial party being the Royal Irish Rangers. And it was interesting then, so you had this sort of sense of community and the war on terrorism and the relationships that were built up by operational deployments in Afghanistan, etc. And so what I think, in terms of one of the lasting things, and again, flying back into Vilnius this time from the war on terrorism, is that those relationships are ongoing, and those that were built in the war on terrorism are now adapting and shifting, but the foundations are adapting to shifting to what we're experiencing, say, in the Baltics. So on my Ryanair flight over, there was Lithuanian soldiers in civvies, there was UK soldiers in civvies. I landed at the airport. There were certain kinds of assets there, which I'm sure are pretty open source, given that everyone can see them, but that were there as a very strong deterrent. So I think that is one of the overlasting things about the global war on terrorism. I also think, obviously, you've got to spin both plates. You know, it's great power competition and the threat of conventional war, and still, if you talk to the guys in CT and intelligence, they still have to look at the overseas groups and ISKP. You know, those bombings of Moscow, the bombing in Tehran. I mean, they may look like an ally to some of us, but they're not. You know, and so that has to be monitored and balanced against, of course, the self-initiated terrorists, which is a massive workload. And I don't know if any of you saw the speech by the head of MI5 in the UK yesterday, just outlining how the terrorist threat is now merging with the state-based threat. And so what we're seeing is, you know, and again, closer to home here, the sabotage operations and sabotage in the gig economy era. And there's a couple of good articles about this coming out, which I can share with you as well. What do I think? Clash of civilizations? I mean, yeah and no. Always a clash of civilizations is what you do with those clashes and how they're mobilized, of course. But certainly, and it was fascinating, I thought, listening to General Andrzejczyk yesterday and his idea of the 3 centers of gravity. And the way that, and of course, we know where the theaters are, and we're starting to see what the emerging strategic threat, of course, is. But there's another very good article people, again, may be interested in terms of the 3 worlds by John Eikenberry, which came out, I think, last summer. And it's essentially what he says is that the way the century is going is it's the West, it's the East, and it's the rest. And it's the relationship between all those 3 that are going to obviously determine how it goes. I think the way, and I think it's becoming, in terms of strategy, you know, you have much more experience of actually doing than me, but from the strategic point of view, the events in Gaza and Ukraine, but especially what's going on with Iran, I think and again, it ties back to what General Andrzejczyk was saying about making the right choices, because like Iran is actually, as we know, in many respects, starting to look increasingly weak. And you've got this axis of closer ties and cooperation happening, of course, between Russia, Iran, China, North Korea. And I wonder, in terms of strategy, you know, is there a piece emerging here about where the weakest center of that axis is at the moment? Question mark. I think just more broadly, last 2 points, escalation, you know, Iran thought it was playing, you know, 3D global chess with Israel, and whether we, you know, debate the rights or wrongs of it, Israel just bombed the chess tournament, essentially. So there's this point about what's going on with escalation at the moment, escalation management. I think there's a need, given sort of developing picture with China's nuclear ambitions for, as Ed Christie said yesterday, you know, a real look at NATO, European nuclear deterrence, given the kind of wider stretching emerging strategy that seems to be happening. And I think finally, the last thing is just international humanitarian law, question mark, in the recent conflicts we've seen. Are those norms that we sort of fought with over the last, you know, 80 odd years, are they going to still hold if we go to proper conventional war against the Russians? The evidence is probably not.
Thank you for your brief but broad overview on the global context. So, Mr. Väli, could you bring us more focused overview on regional defense issues, particularly focusing on security arrangements in Europe and the Baltics? Do we live in the era of power politics again? How are security changes in Europe shaping operation in the Baltics? How did Finland and Sweden's historic decision to join NATO transform the defense picture in the eastern flank? And what adaptation should states make in the Baltic Sea region to address future defense challenges? So, Mr. Väli, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, if we start with a change, one can actually say that nothing has changed. I mean, if you look at Russia, it is the same as it always has been. Aggressive empire, not hesitating to use military power. It is the same. Nothing has changed. Disregard of international law, Again, look at the past. They were bombing hospitals in Aleppo, not to kill the wounded, but to kill the doctors. So the Russian way of war is the same as it always has been. It is as aggressive as it always has been. And we spoke yesterday also quite intensively about the strategy and lack of it. But I think we also have to speak about the strategic culture. Because Russian strategic culture hasn't changed. But West has to change. The strategic culture has to change, and we have to be ready, if necessary, again, to use military power, if necessary. So basically, we have to look for the change in the strategic culture in West. To the region itself, I have heard some arguments that perhaps those regional frameworks might be damaging NATO, as unity of NATO as an organization. I don't believe it. In my point of view, this kind of underlying regional frameworks are strength of NATO, and people mostly, they do not recognize those regional frameworks. Why is it, or what is the strength in? Well, despite all the cohesion, but decision-making within 32 nations, it will take time. I've seen that quite a lot. I spent in Brussels almost 6 years, plus 2 years commuting back and forth. I was responsible in the military side for preparing Wales and Warsaw summits. And I saw how NATO handled Libya operation. So despite all the cohesion, but decision-making will take time. This means that if you have proper regional arrangements, that some of the troops of allies, in case of need, will be already there, while NATO is still deciding. And that's a good thing. It is not damaging the unity at all. So we should kind of keep those regional arrangements there. Looking at the geography in terms of the region, so I think the biggest change what we witness is the joining of the alliance by Sweden and Finland. And that changed the military balance as well as the situation in the region very drastically. Baltic Sea is almost as an internal sea for the NATO. The only thing what we have to take care now in case of the trouble is to close the pathway to the St. Petersburg and to isolate or even take Kaliningrad. And that's it. So the Baltic Fleet is not there anymore. The trouble here is, and what we have to take care of is are the command and control arrangements within the alliance. Because it's military classic. So the weak points always are the connection points between different units or forces. And we have one here. So here, every nation has made its own decision how to link up the national command structure with the NATO one. Just to remind you, very recent decision in Finland to offer a land command as LCC for NATO, which then is under the JFC Norfolk. Coming to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, we obviously belong to Brunssum, which is logical. So there is a division line. We have to take care of it, not to make it as a weak spot. Referring now to Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, we are all small states, with all due respect. What does it mean? The only way to survive is the whole society approach. That's the only way. We cannot survive otherwise. It's not only about the military capability, it is about the resilience of the entire society. And we have to involve everybody without any exception, and it has an impact. The crisis, the war, has an impact on everyone who is living in. But there is also a potential here, and we have to learn how to use that potential. Just to give you an example. When war started, we had a small factory, actually not a factory, a workshop, who was producing every kind of stuff from metal. So they had experience, they had the tools. So, and they recognized that basically we can use armor plates for body armor. They did it, and they provided as a donation for Ukrainians. So they can do the same for us, if need. So we have to chart all those dual-use capabilities in addition to the military ones, and make sure that the entire society is properly involved and can contribute to the security effort. Economy is important in many ways. Again, example, because of defense investments and increase in defense budget, Estonia currently is struggling to be within the framework of 3% guidelines in terms of the state deficit, because this is important while having euro as a currency. And I know the same problem is in Latvia. I don't know about Lithuanians, but I assume that you have the same trouble. So economy is important. Investments in the defense area will impact everyone. In terms of the military capabilities in place, of course, you have to build up your own military capabilities, but also it is a question of allies being present or not. And more importantly, it is about the question of early warning in this region, because we don't have strategic depth. We are small nations. And here again, just to remind you, the war in Ukraine in 2002, it did not start suddenly. You remember? We had multitudes of pre-warnings. US even predicted dates and said that war is coming. And funny enough, in December, I was witnessing the bet between two flag officers. One said that, no, there won't be war. Another said, it will be. And the prize was 12 bottles of champagne. Someone lost. I don't know whether they drank it. But you see how difficult it was to believe in. And yet the warnings were there. So early warning, very, very important in terms of the small nations.
Great insights, sir. So thank you for overview. So let's turn to you, General. So also I am, as Dr. Burry, reading some scholar materials, and it catches me so-called Alexander Mettler thesis, one thesis, which is relevant for our discussion today. He says that regionalization of alliance defense planning is a straightforward way for meeting the threats that NATO faces today. So, General, are we rediscovering the geography in NATO defense planning again? Expeditionary warfare and regional defense approaches compatible in working together? How does the war experience in Ukraine influence NATO collective defense mindset? How does NATO is responding to the future needs of the battlefield? So could you please provide us with the professional assessment of the battlefield changes in the context of NATO? Sir,
first of all, thank you for the invitation from the Ministry of Defense to be here today. It's an honor. I know we've got media out there, we've got students, we've got Alliance soldiers and officers out there in the crowd today. First of all, I don't work in Brussels. I work in Mons. That's SACEUR's headquarters down there. It's the military headquarters. And I'd like to very quickly address, what is the Ukraine war, the re-invasion done to the alliance? Well, I would offer up 2 years ago in Vilnius, it transformed the alliance because we now have entered back into an era of collective defense. The alliance hasn't been involved in collective defense since 1989. And as my colleague said out there last night, if you flew in the Vilnius airport like I did last night, those were Apache Longbow helicopters out of Fort Cavazos, Texas, sitting there. Okay, and inside of Lithuania itself, some of you serve with the Germans here, as they put a full brigade in here. And just past them in Pravati, there's a U.S. tank battalion out there, and there's many other NATO assets. And I bring that up because this is the era of collective defense and the commitment by the 32 nations that's transforming everything we did, everything we do. I would offer up, and I'll just very quickly, and then we can take questions on this, is what is the key lessons learned? Some of these are hard truths from the Ukraine that I think everybody has got to understand. Everybody believed a few years ago we would never see the return of large-scale combat operations and attrition warfare to the European continent. I think there was many people thought that that was dead forever. We had just come out of 20 years of campaigning against the war on terror. But the cold reality is it's here. And the cold reality is that there's hundreds and thousands of soldiers on both sides of that war in the Ukraine. What is the effect on us? I think there's really three main lessons that we need to learn. They're hard truths. I would say the first one that we need to talk about is our armies themselves. You know, one of the key things that has happened in the past 30 years is most of the NATO allies have taken their ground forces and downsized them, if not just got rid of them completely. So we're in an era right now, we're going to have to regrow ground capability. We're going to have to regrow armies. These are unpopular conversations in many capitals because of two reasons. One is the capital investment that has to go behind that. But the second reason is that we have a manpower issue inside of the alliance of filling our armies to even what they're allocated to right now. Some of the allies have went back to some kind of conscription, and I'm not here politically to talk about that at all. Those are sovereign decisions. But manning our armies of what we're witnessing in the Ukraine right now, it is going to be important if God forbid we ever have to go in collective defense of the alliance. I think the second thing that we learned from the Ukraine is this issue of cost curve, right? You know, we've got $10,000 weapons destroying, you know, $1 million tank. You know, we're offset here, and I don't know what the way ahead here is, but you know, the Ukrainians have rendered the Black Sea Fleet incapable with the use of 10,000 euro drones. So I think that's another implication. And I think the third one, you know, that we have to look at is, you know, our industrial base to produce military capabilities is challenged right now. So I will stop there. I look forward to the questions here. These are issues that sit in front of us every day. And I'll just stop on this. But in Vilnius 2 years ago, we do have the plans necessary and the C2 and the early warning systems in place in the alliance and being built on right now. But it's many of the other things we're learning from the Ukraine, particularly in the capabilities that have to be filled in. Thank you.
General, thank you for your insights, and it brings us straight forward to our next section of the discussion. So we will discuss the tools of war needed for future operations. So I hope we can all agree that military structures are essential tools for any operation. Yeah, definitely. So they consist of three components: people, equipment, and supplies. The same sack of money is used for all of them. If it's true, unraveling essential components is more detailed, is a reasonable approach. So let's turn to people domain. So as you addressed, Sarah, the lost interest in military service of the people. So is it still possible to mobilize Western society on a large scale for a major conventional war?
Yeah, I can. Thanks. Yeah, I think, you know.
And please jump in if you have a counter-argument. So
I come at this,
make this static.
I mean, look, the golden standard here, we're sitting in it, and it's essentially, you know, Estonia and the Finns, depending on what model you want to take. I think the West, and I mean, by this stage, the Western nations of Europe, to be more precise, probably need to start getting their house in order in this respect. I think societal resilience is something that needs, as the Baltics have shown, it's something that's worked at. And cohesion, values and desire to defend democracy is not just a given that is out there. Yeah, it needs to be explained, it needs to be invested in and worked at. And so a lot of what there's been some, UK MOD looking at like, well, how do we do this? What are the values, for example, in the UK of young people? And what you find is that they're starting to diverge significantly from the traditional military values. And then those militaries are trying to sort of change how they operate and change the offer and train in rather than, what's the word, select out. So that's a piece of this too. But essentially, I think really the big lesson that the Baltics can provide and the Scandinavian countries to the other countries that don't have it is to start looking at this is how you do societal resilience from the school level up. And then you start to, I think the next stage, as the General was saying, is what you want to do is, excuse me, match that with a scalable system of mass generation. Across population, and this is something we don't have in the UK.
I just differ opinion a little bit. Obviously, if we would go into crisis and the conflict in an Article 5 scenario, there would be mobilization. I don't think we're ever going to have the luxury of going the full mobilization. This is never, we're not going to be able to generate forces over time. What that says is we have to be back to hard power. We have to have standing forces in all domains that deters Putin. That's the only thing he understands. The only thing he understands is those Apache helicopters that are sitting in Vilnius' airport. That capability and hard power has to be brought down again, and it's got to be ready, because readiness is what creates deterrence.
Thank you, sir, for your insight. Readiness is a vital component. So, is the return of conscription the only way to build up large armies and reserves? We recently can witness that Latvia has recently returned the conscription. Other nations also discussed, as I am aware, United Kingdom also had some discussion or not. Denmark as well. So, as the General addressed, we have serious problems in generating manpower, even to fill our ranks in peacetime. If we are talking about the large-scale upcoming war? So, is this inevitable conscription again? So,
in Estonian case, that's not
Estonia is a brilliant example.
We have had conscription all the time. So, and actually it has a very, very strong support from the society. More than 70% of people are in favor of, and have been in the favor of conscription all the time. But I would say you have to distinguish here two issues. One is to generate a mass, meaning your large forces. And another one is to keep up the professional military in sufficient quality and quantity. And there are two different issues and problems because you're right, demography is a stubborn thing. So for the smaller nations, and we have had, at least in Estonia, trouble to have all slots in the military academy to be filled, and this is something which we have to deal with. We haven't had any issues in terms of the motivation of reserve personnel, because if we have had reserve exercises, usually the fulfillment process is rather high. But again, this pool is generated over the time. It has to be kept intact, refreshed, and it is working. But you're absolutely right. The basement for that, the basis, is will to fight, will to defend your society. Yeah. If that is there, you won't have issue.
And that's sort of what I was getting at, that societal resilience has a readiness and deterrence piece, and not in the actual platforms, but behind it. It's important. Otherwise, if you just think that you're going to walk in there and, yeah, they've got the platforms, but if I take them out, the society collapses. It's less deterrent. You're suffering less deterrence. Whereas if you're like, this is going to be a hard fight because the people are behind us.
Gentlemen, so your reasoning has brought me a memory from my recent visit to Israel. They said that society builds the armies and armies builds the societies. So it's two-way approach, and conscription in various societies serves as socialization and institutionalization tool for armies and for societies as well. So thank you for insight. insights. And let's turn to the equipment domain. So quantity and quality was discussed previously again in making armies for future battlefield needs. So are large numbers of equipment more important than sophistication, as might war in Ukraine suggest? General, what do you think?
You know, there's mixed thoughts on, are tanks ineffective? Don't we need them? Don't we need maritime because how vulnerable it's shown itself into the Black Sea? And I think, my personal thoughts on this is, if you think we're going to win the next war with long-range precision strike and drones, I think we're all fooling ourselves. And we got to make sure that we don't observe the wrong lessons out of the Ukraine. I think it goes without saying, whatever the capabilities that the alliance has taken on to build, and those were agreed upon in the Washington summit, that's a broad scope of capabilities in maritime, space, cyber. Yet, you have to be able to generate a variety of capabilities. No one solution. So let's be careful of watching the Ukraine war. The Ukrainians, and and God bless them, we hope the best. But they're fighting a war of necessity now with the stuff that they have. That's not necessarily that's not how NATO would ever want to conduct a defense of the alliance. We want it on our terms. That's what we want.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We should not make a mistake that in case of the all-out war in politics, we will have a copy-paste Ukrainian models taken here. No, it is not the same thing. And NATO does not fight the same way as Ukrainians are forced to fight. One other thing I would like to point out is that the technology, the ever-accelerating turns and cycles of technology, what Zaluzhny very nicely described in his essay. So this needs to be taken into account, and we touched upon yesterday while speaking about the development of drones. So technology goes on, and we have an issue with the capacity of defense industry, because the money is now there in the market, but they cannot produce fast enough. The capacity is not there. And Estonia recently decided to invest 1.6 billion into the ammunition. But just to give you an example of ATACMS missile, 300 kilometers, very solid, but it's going to be replaced very soon with a much more powerful missile reaching 500 kilometers. So we have to decide which one we are going to take. Either we will take what is in the market and also wait for some, I would say, years, or whether we will look at the better and the new one. So all those questions are still unanswered, and we have to consider, and this is a problem for everyone.
Okay. So
yeah, I just think
do you have to add up something?
Yeah, no, we're basically talking about what the general said about the defence industrial base and how that will be one of the main deciders of quantity versus quality. So yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting in that is about logistics resilience, which is a subset. But yeah, we can get into that later. That's really my thought.
Yeah. Thank you for turning the experience to Ukraine. And the next question would be connected maybe with the so-called, maybe someone is calling it like a new era or new Wunderwaffen drones. Yeah. Because it changed modern warfare picture. We cannot deny it. So from your perspective, how do drone systems shape the need of the buildup of the military structures? It's definitely, previously we had some presentation from Ukraine, and we said that almost in all military structures, starting from maneuver units up to the intelligence, reconnaissance, and artillery systems, all over there is the drones.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a no-brainer, right? It's integrated air missile defense. That's a combination of fifth-generation fighters, ground-based air defense, sensors. This stuff is very, very expensive. But I look at Israel. Look what they've had to do to defend their nation. Look look at the cost of not having integrated air missile defenses on the Ukrainians right now. Again, is there cheaper ways to do, integrated air missile defense? Maybe. I think we prototyping and so forth, but this is it's a necessity. And again, it's an area over the last 25 years of counterinsurgency and out-of-area operations there was no requirement for.
Okay, so let's turn a little bit to defense industry issue. So recently, Statista has published a brilliant article in which the analysis was made in comparison European and United States position on main weapon systems. So they conclude that Europe has 6 times as many weapon systems as the United States. So European armies has 17 different types of main battle tanks. Also have 20 different types of combat vehicles and 27 different howitzers. The United States relies on just 2 versions of each. Altogether, the United States has 30 major weapons, while the European has 178. So how can the riddle of what's different European-made major weapon system can be sorted out? Doctor?
Yeah, I don't really have the answer. It's clearly a function of the way that the nations have developed and also legacy Warsaw Pact kit. So, I mean, over time and with more standardization and pooling through NATO, of which they work at, you would expect that to be addressed. But of course, everybody's got their own defense, industrial, and electoral politics bases, which they have to play to too. So, I think in the case there's some great work going on, but and I think it will get better. I don't think that's something you're ever going to get Europe down to the US levels.
So you are skeptical in this?
I'm hopeful, but I think it won't get to the stage where the US is.
Yeah, but referring back to the experience from Ukrainians, so you have a NATO standard weapon system, and you have NATO standard shells to it. Let's speak about either mortar shells or FAN 55. And what you have recognized that, no, they don't match together, despite that it is TANAC, NATO standard. So we haven't sorted that out. So I would say, well, this has to wait. Today, the main issue is volume. The production lines have to produce. Well, unifying all of that, that has to wait. That's not the main problem of today.
General, has it to wait? Different units shouldn't be put together? What is your opinion on that? What is experience of the United States? How you managed to have only 2 types of each major weapon systems?
Well, I mean, the United States is, obviously, the obvious. It's a large country. It's globally focused. So, it was out of necessity. I go back to the general's point, though. I think there's some immediate needs, and that's that standardization of the ammunition and munitions, right? Because there is a NATO standard for that stuff, and it was adhered to for decades. But again, it's something that wasn't required in the era of the peace dividend, and people got away from it. So I think there's an immediacy when you start talking of common stuff like a 155 shell for a howitzer, right? There's a NATO standard for that. Everybody should be able to fire the same thing. So I think there's some immediate things that could be solved out there. Getting everybody to go to like single platforms, I would find that hardly unlikely based off of.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen, for your insights and considerations. So let's move to the last but not the less important part of our panel, the adaptation of operations. So at this point, I will be a little bit more provocative, I could say, because I will try to challenge the NATO deterrence and defense posture. So again, my memory backs again in one unofficial talks we have discussed with Israeli officials on the issue what we are taking here, and they brought me so-called the lesson learned from them. So I quote, "Do not deter, but be prepared. It's an essential lesson I can give you." So is the Russian invasion of Ukraine a monument of deterrence by denial concept failure? Is it so? Can we call it? Because we failed to deter the Russians to invade Ukraine. Israel said that we failed to deter Hamas, and as well, we failed to deter Iran to put a direct attack on Israel, which was quite unusual thing and quite new thing in our security realm. So, General.
I mean, the Ukraine, was not and is not a NATO member. So that's just the first fine line right there. Mm-hmm. What did Putin get out of the Ukraine? He got Finland and Sweden to join the alliance. He got the first collective defense plans to defend NATO territory since 1989. He got brand new NATO command and control that is in place or growing everywhere, to include a new joint force headquarters to run the North Atlantic and the High North out of Norfolk. So, that's deterrence, and that's what's going on every day today for the 32 members that are out there.
Yeah, Dr. Burry, do you have to add something?
No, on your point about, I think Jens Stoltenberg's interview at the weekend, where he said, and hindsight is 2020, but looking at how deterrence works and the way that the aid and the support for Ukraine has happened, he says we should have done more earlier now. And I think I would agree with that, both in terms of what went in and then the size of the aid that should have gone in immediately after the ground scale, or the ground invasion.
So, yeah, in terms of deterrence, first and foremost, the readiness is part of deterrence.
Yeah.
But we should not look back what has happened in terms of deterring Russia invading Ukraine. We have to concentrate what is going on currently. And that's also not good, because if you look at our storyline, what we are saying constantly, the messaging that it's not only about Ukraine, we are defending in Ukraine our Western way of life, the rules-based world order. And then next to it are our practical steps. Well, those two do not match in my point of view. And that's the issue with deterrence, that's the issue with credibility, that's the issue with resolve of Western nations. That's the problem.
So I will keep being provocative, because our discussion should be not blank, just a talk. So another important part is, should NATO or single states become more proactive or not in its operations? For example, France President Macron calls to start training mission in Ukraine. On Ukraine's President Zelensky asked to cover the no-flight zone over Ukraine. So what is your opinion about that? Should we be more involved in this conflict or not? So I keep provocating.
Yeah, but I refer back to yesterday. Remember, someone proposed yesterday that, in terms of air defense, why don't we make it rotational and not only send in our air defense systems, but send also in with personnel? So I would turn it otherwise around. Look at what our leaders are doing. They are sneaking into Ukraine secretly and emerge only in Kiev. So let's start from there. Ukraine is a sovereign nation. Let's make a high-level visits. Let's announce it in advance. And, oh, by the way, signal to Russia that anything what flies is considered hostile, and we will shut it down. Why not?
Dr. Burry?
Yeah, there's rules, my understanding of it from a sort of slightly more academic perspective, but confirmed with, former seniors in the US, was like, when this happened, the rules of the game is, from precedent, is you can essentially give that partner nation everything conventionally, and it doesn't have to go to nuclear. And that would then be on the Russians to escalate if they were. And it seems like, in this idea, I think, and to link it back also with the war on terror, our populations are somewhat tired and almost distrustful of intel in some respects, but also, the military, or the use, the effectiveness of the use of military force. And I think we've kind of lost a bit of our resolve in terms of backing ourselves with this sometimes. and going, you know, if you're going to do that, if you're going to make that threat, there are very serious consequences, and we can go there too.
Okay, thank you for your insights. So I keep provoking you, sirs, again. So in one book, Howard, in a famous book, Invention of Peace and Reinvention of War, he wrote, European society during the millennium between the 8th and 18th centuries was probably exceptionally bellicose, and that bellicosity does much to explain its eventual global dominance. But it had to be bellicose if it was to survive at all. End of the quote. So does the defense and military stance make Western adversaries more comfortable in their belligerent strategies and operations? Sir, what do you think? General?
I'll let one of you gentlemen take that first.
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, but we are back in the addressing the question of strategic culture. Yeah. So Europe has used soft power, has used economical power, and in the current stage of the world, the security picture what we have, the emerging of other hubs of power, it doesn't work anymore. So we have to find another way, and we have to reinvent some things which we have forgotten. The capacity is still there. But in the long term, I don't think that helps either. Because again, if you look at the long-term future, the economic power, which in terms of Europe is kind of going lower, and in the East is growing. So we have actually big trouble emerging. So the global order will change. Not now, perhaps not in 5 years, but in the future for sure. Are we ready? I don't think so.
Okay. Do you have to?
No, nothing really.
Okay. So, General, let's cool down a little bit and turn to the current situation in NATO and its evolving adaptation of operations. Is regional defense a future priority for NATO and national operations?
I'm sorry.
Is regional defense a future priority for NATO and national operations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the collective defense plans that were approved in this capital 2 years ago and then have been developed out. I mean, it is a priority for the alliance that we go back to modernized collective defense. I say modernized collective defense, okay, because it's got to be adaptable. And a plan's a plan, but they have been built that they can be adapted.
So, gentlemen, thank you for insight, and it's time for questions. So, do we have any questions? Okay, great. But here we go. Oh, we have here 4 questions, and I will try to read it. How you think maybe it's proper time to renew Baltic military cooperation of land forces and create joint Baltic brigade or division? So maybe, Mr. Väli, could you elaborate? Is it at all possible?
Everything
we have
possible.
Discussed it about the Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and its determinants.
If there is a will, there is a way. So, and I would say there are multitudes of regional frameworks, including the 3B cooperation, which has a long, long history. And some of the projects have been proving very, very successful. In terms of generating joint forces, well, what is going on currently, and what is, by the way, amazing, that we have very often very different approaches in there. Like Lithuania is now generating national divisional headquarters and national division. Estonia has been trying to do that for quite a while now. In Latvia, you have multinational division North, which is, by the way, NATO certified. Estonia has not considered to certify its division headquarters according to NATO standards, for the reason what I don't understand. So this process is ongoing already, But in my point of view, if you look at, again, at geography, and you think that Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania is an area of responsibility for one single division, frankly, that's not enough. If you look at the historical examples, if you look at the current way of war, how it is fought, that's not enough. We have to have more forces in, and it is not just a question of single division.
So thank you for your answer, and I think this question will be best suited for our distinguished guest, General. General, what about Russian drones and missiles flying into the NATO countries, Latvia, Poland, and Romania? Are we really deterring Russia?
So the cruise missiles that have entered NATO airspace, the drones that have entered NATO airspace over the last year, you have to understand the magnitude of warfare that's going on in the Ukraine. You're talking attacks on a daily basis. Some of these have hundreds and hundreds of drones. There's a lot going on over in the Ukraine. There's electronic warfare going on. The Russians are not deliberately targeting NATO territory. But these are sensitive issues, right? These sovereign nations. These become very big issues. And quite frankly, the alliance has reacted. We have enhanced vigilance activities going on up here in the Baltics that were being led by Brunson. Just started a week ago that involves more air policing, more early warning. So there is a reaction, but we're not at war. We're at peace. Let's just keep that in mind. And we are at peace right now. So there's a whole set of rules that come along with that. There's a whole set of procedures to be followed. But I will just tell you this, Baltic air policing up here, early warning, what goes on, it is working. Okay, we have not been surprised. The systems are in place. There is a reaction. That's a great question, though, and it's a very serious one.
So, thank you, sir, for your answer. So, another question: China yet isn't supplying ammunition and weaponry to Russia, as Iran and North Korea does. What changes might affect China's posture, Dr. Buri, from your historical...
My very limited experience of that part of the world. Well, clearly, there's a number of indicators. I mean, in terms of it's going to be, of course, a cost-benefit analysis for China. So what actually changes that? It's going to be in terms of either Russia starts to have a considerable setback on the conventional side and then appeals for help, and China feels, and I think we're a long way off that. There's also going to be the deterrence factor, whether China thinks it can get away with it or not, or whether it's going to get found out. I think that actually the way things are coming out in the OSINT world, things come out generally fairly quickly, most things. So that's another one. But then there's obviously the competition with the US and whether it wants to try to start to hedge again in that. And that would be, I think you might start to see that depending on how long the war goes on in Ukraine, but it definitely remains on the table. But I can't really see a position at the moment where they would... from the open source, my limited perspective, where they'd be getting the required benefit yet for that. Don't know.
Okay. So let's back to NATO and Baltic cohesion issue, Mr. Väli. So how can NATO and Baltic states prepare better for the Russian way of war? What is your opinion? Yeah.
Well, I think it has been said already. The best. How to be best prepared? Absolutely, there is a dimension of the state itself. So you have to do everything in your power to be prepared, prepare your capabilities, your forces, your equipment, your societies. But also, you're absolutely right, there is also an alliances dimension. So it's not enough that you are ready, but the alliance has to be ready as well. And here you have to make sure that other allies understand what is your concern and are ready and willing to contribute. And this is possible, and I think this has been going already for quite a while, because this time when I mean, going back to the war in Georgia, Estonian Chief of Defense went to Georgia to visit just shortly before the war. And what he saw actually triggered us to post a warning in NATO system. Did anybody look at this? No. But I do think that today the situation is different.
I just offer, the answer to that is we are. There is a major transformation going on in the Baltics, both with the collective security and the plans, the integrated plans amongst up here. This is happening right now. Yeah. This is happening in real time. A month ago, the Canadians went from battle group to brigade size in Latvia. The British did it for the second year in a row up in Estonia. The Germans did it down here. You've got thousands of NATO soldiers from, I think, 27 countries that are in the 3 Baltic states. With a clear signal that no matter what happens, the Baltics will never fight alone. They'll never fight isolated. That's not going to happen. But we're going to have to be patient, as we've talked about up here, as we're buying down on new capabilities, restocking our magazines, our arsenals. This is going to take some time.
Okay. Thank you for your answers. So before we wrap up, I would like to summarize and to address 3 takeaways which during our discussion I grabbed from your insights. So first one, nothing has changed in the battlefield. However, Western strategic approach has to find its way. Another takeaway, regional framework is the strength of NATO, and we are ongoing process which would take some time, as General mentioned. And third takeaway, the whole society approach is the only way to address these security challenges. So, gentlemen, thank you for your insights, of your perception of taking your time-demanding duties a little bit away, and we are glad having you here. So please give them all warm applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, General.
Thanks.